Bismillahirrahmanirrahim and Assalamu alaikum class. I hope all of you will be doing fine. As you know that we have already started our chapter number 4, which is environment and feeding relationships. So, before moving towards our today's topic of concern, which is food web, I would like to call about the previous knowledge about the previous topics. So, let's have a brief review of the previous few topics. The first topic we are discussing here is habitat. What it is? It is habitat. Habitat is the place or the area where organisms live or reproduce. What it is? It is the area or the place where organisms, either as plants or animals, lives or reproduce. And the habitat basically provide basic needs of the life to the organisms. And what are the basic needs? For example, protection, for example, water, for example, food, for example, air, for example, shelter. All of these are the basic need for the life to an organism. So, habitat basically provide these basic needs. Let's see here are the four different kinds of the habitat. The first is the grassland, the second is the pond, the third is the desert habitat, and fourth is the rainforest habitat. So, let's see one by one and discuss that what we have already learned about all of these four kinds of habitats. First, in the grassland habitat, we have discussed that it is a grassy, it is windy, and it is partially dry area. And the animals and different plants which are present in this habitat are goats, sheep, cows, like herbivores, foxes, wolves, cheetahs, eagles, hawks, etc. All of these organisms are present in this habitat. In the second, which is the pond habitat, in this habitat, basically it is also called aquatic habitat. What it is called? It is called aquatic habitat, in which different plants like algae, water lily, duckweed, etc. And in animals, there are fishes, snails, frogs, etc. present because they are aquatic. The third in this desert habitat is basically also called the driest land area. Why? Because there is very little rainfall. And the animals and the plants, the organisms who live in this habitat are basically cacti and euphorbia, lizards, snake, etc. So, moving towards the last but not the least, this is rainforest habitat, as the name indicates that rainforest. So, we can say that it is always wet. And why it is always wet, class? Because there is a rain which receives whole the year by the forest. The area which receive rain whole year, so it is always wet. And the different kind of organisms in the plants and animal which are present in this habitat are different type of trees, herbs, frogs, parrots, hummingbirds, cats, etc. are the different organisms which are present in this habitat. Now, moving towards the next term, which we have already discussed in our previous topic, let's recall it is adaptation. Adaptation is basically a change. What it is? It is a change. The change in the organism's body or behavior that helps to survive in habitat. For example, like we can see here, there are two different type of habitats. The first is the aquatic habitat and second is the land habitat. In this habitat, basically different animals and plants live. Let's see, I said it is the adaptation. Adaptation is a change. For example, I said in this habitat, duck is present. What are present? Ducks are present. And ducks have webbed feet. What have they? They have webbed feet. Why they have webbed feet now? Because this is their adaptation according to their habitat. So they can easily swim in the water. This helps in swimming, so they can easily survive in the aquatic habitat. While Coming toward the land habitat, for example, I have an example of the polar bear. Polar bear have a thick fur on their bodies. And why they have thick fur in their bodies? Because they keeps warm in the freezing cold. Because this fur keeps warm the animals from the freezing cold. So this is their adaptation for the habitat. So it's clear. Now my question is to all of you that is it possible for any fish, for any frog who live in this aquatic habitat can live in this land area? Is it possible? No. Why it is not possible? Because every plant or animal or organisms have adaptation according to their own habitat. So it cannot easily survivable for any of the different organisms to live in other habitats. So now moving towards the next, you can see here the two different pictures. In the first one, there are the different land habitats, for example, desert, for example, rainforest, grassland, and forest, etc. And here is the aquatic habitat. Okay, we further discuss about the food chain. You are very well known about the food chain in the previous class. What is food chain, class? Food chain is basically a feeding relationship between the different organisms. It is the feeding relationship between the different organisms. For example, when one organism eat other organism and then it is eaten by the other one, it is called as the food chain. Like for example, you can see here is the flower which is producer, and this flower is further eaten by the caterpillar which is consumer. And all of these are consumer which are basically utilizing or consuming the food from the producer. So we can say that one organism is eaten by the other one and other is eaten by the next one. So all of this feeding relationship is called food chain. What we discuss more, that the food chain has main two components. First is the producer who prepare the food, who make the food, and second is the consumer who consume this food. So you can see there who are producers. Of course, the plants are producers. But about the consumer, we have discussed previous that consumer are further divided into three categories. The first is primary consumer, and primary consumer are also known as herbivores. Now, why we call them herbivores? Because they eat plants. The organisms who eat plants are known as herbivores. Second was the secondary consumer, and secondary consumer are also known as carnivores. Now, why we call them carnivores? Because they eat animals, so we call them carnivores. Let's see third one, which is tertiary consumer. Tertiary consumer are also known as the omnivores. Like for example, humans. Why humans are omnivores? Because they can eat both plants and animals both. So they are omnivores. I think all of these terms get more clear. So now this is the energy pyramid. This is what this is the energy pyramid in which you can see the different trophic levels. What are these? These are the different trophic levels. First is the producer, and this trophic level is transferring their energy to the next trophic level, which is primary consumer. And then primary consumer is further transferring their energy to the secondary consumer to the next trophic level, and it is the last trophic level, which is the tertiary consumer, in which the energy is transferring. But now my question is this, that how this is beneficial for the soil. Now we see that how it is beneficial for the soil. When this animal, this hawk will be died, what will happen? The decomposer will decompose their dead particle, their dead material, their dead body, and then after decomposition, after the decomposing, these particles will be get mixed in the soil and it increase the fertility of the soil. So see how so you can see that how it is beneficial for the soil as well. Moving towards our topic of concern. That was all about the review of the previous topics. Now our today topic is food web. Now class, what is web? All of you are familiar with this word, web. You know that spider web. How this spider web is formed? By the different overlapping or network of the threads. The spider web is formed. So same in the case of the food web, that it is formed again by the network or the overlapping. But overlapping of what? It is formed by the overlapping of food chains. Several food chains of the ecosystem overlap and forming a network which we call the food web. These several food chains, you are very familiar with the food chains, that food chains are simpler version of the feeding relationship in which only one producer and then one consumer, one primary consumer, one secondary consumer, and one tertiary consumer was there. But when these several food chains are overlapped, they form a network which is food web. So, uh, just like a food chain, everything is not so simple. So, here's a difficult part of the feeding relationship you can see, like in this picture. Here's a food web. Here is the primary consumer is not eaten by the only one secondary consumer, but it is eaten by the other one as well. You can see here that the one organism is not eaten by only one, they are eaten by the different kind of organism at a one time. So it is basically the overlapping of the food chain. So we call them food web. Now, what is a different food web in environment? You can see here, this is the food web in the aquatic habitat. Okay, here is the algae, which is eaten by the three different organisms at a time, and then again these organisms are eaten by the different organism at one time. So it is the food web in the aquatic habitat. Now here's a video you can see here. After watching this video, the food chain and food web, both of the terms will be clear to all of you. You can easily distinguish between both of the terms easily.
The food chains that we see, which has one producer, one primary consumer, and one secondary consumer, and decomposers, is called a simple food chain. A food chain is a simple version of what actually happens in nature. But everything is not so simple. This looks complex. In this chart, grass can be eaten by both rabbit and grasshopper, and this mouse can be eaten by both the snake and the kookaburras. Also, this snake can be eaten by the eagle and kookaburras. So a food web is a network of food chains by which nutrients and energy are passed on from one species of living organisms to another species. Now you know about food chains and food webs. Can you show the diagram?
So I think it was so easy to distinguish by help of this video. You can see clearly that food chain is a very simplest version, while in the food web, different food chains are forming overlapping and forming a whole network, a forming web. So it's the food web. I hope all of the idea will be clear to all. Thank you so much. If you have any question, you can ask me after watching this lecture. Thank you.